Our guest this month is Richie Smith. And Richie Smith is one of Ireland's most successful and respected directors. He recently directed the critically acclaimed Netflix feature, The Siege of Jadotville. It's, how would you describe it? A geopolitical thriller or...
Yeah, and it's, action-oriented. It's about soldiers and the Irish soldiers in the Congo. It's based on a true story. But yeah, and Richie's also done a lot of commercials, a lot of music videos for U2.
He's award-winning director of TV commercials and music videos. He's been working with U2, their videographer, for years.
Yeah.
The Verve, Bon Jovi, Melissa Etheridge, among many others.
But what's cool about Richie though is he's also into action sports.
He's a crazy adventure sport nut.
Right.
He's done fight. He's a black belt.
Fighter.
In some martial art, I forget. I'm sure he'll tell us what it is.
He's boxed in many a pub.
He's
boxed
in Ireland. He's done motocross and a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
And
so in this conversation, we kind of jump into the world of creativity mixing with sport and sport with creativity. How does one help the other? So I know you guys are going to enjoy it. So, welcome Richie Smith to our XTERRA podcast, powered by Braveheart Coaching. Richie, mate, where are you right now?
I am in Dublin, in Ireland. Have been since this whole lockdown started.
Yeah, because, mate, normally you are between Los Angeles and Dublin. And in fact, we met in Los Angeles, didn't we, about, 3 or 4 years ago, I think?
Yeah, if I remember, we met in the cafe somewhere over Santa Monica. It was about your script, All Quiet on the Western Front. I think right. That's where we started. And it was like sort of one of those general meets, see if we got on. And I think we ended up talking more about snowboarding, sport, and fucking injuries during training than we did about the script. I really liked the script. It was like, what am I supposed to say? It's a fucking great script. Okay, what else are we going to talk about?
That's right. Let's talk about other stuff. And I think I remember talking to you about getting in the cold chambers, doing the cryotherapy and stuff like that. Do you remember that?
Cryo, yeah, amazing.
That's right, mate, because you are big into sort of adventure sports, snowboarding, all sorts of crazy ass stuff. But I kind of want to jump back a few years, just a few, because you're not that old, kind of. Well, sort of. I kind of want to talk, because you've got such an amazing background. I want to talk about both your sport and your art, but I want to find out, the types of sports you started off with, how you kind of fell in love with photography and then film and, the sort of visual medium. But let's start you off with sort of your sporting background first.
Okay, let me see. So
little Richie in brown shorts at school.
Yeah. I just went to like a public school, which is in Ireland is just a free school. It's the opposite, means the opposite to England.
Yeah.
And because I come from a working class background and something, you just went to the local school. And first, you had to do a sport. So first sport up was rugby. I think I was a back or something like that. I was a bit of a bull, like a charger. So I can't even remember. Anyway, I played a couple of matches and I didn't like it. I didn't really like it at all, actually. So I just,
mate, that's because you're a wimp. You're a wimp.
I wanted to play like golf or something, So I thought, fuck it, no, this is for mugs. I'm not getting into this. So I picked the other sport you could do, which is water polo. So then I played water polo for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years. So I played for the college, played in the nationals. And actually water polo is a fairly vicious sport. It's pretty tough. Yeah. People don't realize it till you actually get in the pool and realize you're taught to foul. Fouling is part of water polo, Mm-hmm. So I swam, and I played water polo, and then they became competitive for a while, just within the schools,
Yeah. And then when you were at school, were you into any kind of art, or were you more of a sport Billy? Like what was, I
was sort of into art in that I wasn't really into school. So I kept doing not school, I mean, the thing is, the problem with the swimming was that it was like, 7:30 to 8:30 every morning. Wednesdays was like, it was a half day in school. So it was, 2.5 hours in the pool. Saturday was a full day in the pool. And sometimes Sunday you go in for a couple of hours. So like you were literally swimming every day, sometimes twice a day. It's very hard going. So you're fairly fucked at the end of it all, But as I got into, when I got a bit older, like 15 or 13, 14, 15, and I started getting into music and stuff, I started, getting kicked out of classes, and then I'd spend my hour on the corridor drawing and doing covers of albums and, stuff like that, copying stuff. And I kind of started getting into art a little bit at that point,
Yeah.
I didn't really get into photography. Actually, what got me into photography was I was hanging out with these people who, particularly a guy who his whole family were very artistic, and we did a bunch of mushroom trips when we were 15, and then he started doing all this amazing art, and I was like, "Fuck, I can't do this." And so I thought, okay, I'm going to capture what we saw and experienced with photography because I can own that. So I went and bought a camera and just started goofing around, trying to, experiment. And that's where it started,
Yeah.
Now, I heard that you had boxing in your background as well. When did that come in?
I mean, as a kid, my granddad was a boxer, and he fought in the Irish World, or whatever it is, the Irish Championships, and he was always like showing us, how to fight and all this, and he had big hands. And so as little kids, we grew up with him doing that and playing with us. So we always had kind of boxing fever, But I didn't really get into boxing heavily. I mean, I got into fighting on the street because that's what you did when we were younger. But that's not really boxing, I didn't really get into any of that until I got into martial arts.
And what martial arts did you do, or do you do now?
I'm a black belt in Kempo, which is it's the one of the two karates, Japanese karate. And I did some taekwondo and some jiu-jitsu around it.
Right.
But I did my belt through Kempo, and all the competitions I fought in and everything, I fought as a Kempo fighter. So it was either. If it was mixed martial arts, it was just me against kickboxer or whoever it was,
And did that sort of tame that wild spirit in you, or no?
It sort of did in a weird way, except when I got drunk. Like, it was all good. Like, it's like,
You're not helping Irish stereotypes here at all. You know that, right?
No, I am cliched Irish person, but but it's like that would be the things like the club, the club, Christmas drink up would be we go to McDonald's and all get in a fight together, right? So, because we were so used to fighting with each other, it was just like, we just get into a fight. So, a couple of times I got drunk and started fights that, with people, usually a lot of people, just because I'm drunk and I'm like, fuck you. But what would happen is I'd throw a roundhouse kick and then I'd fall on the ground, But I came away from it pretty good. I never really got too badly injured. But when that was just, a period. But martial arts it's a bit like racing bikes on the track. It stops you going mental on the road because you just realize you can do so much more in the sport than you can just free fall. So like you take a motorcycle around the track and you can put it through its paces like nothing else. You can't do that on the street with a bike.
Right. Did you find then that your life after that, as you started to do more martial arts, your life as you now know it, as a sort of a creative artist and stuff, did that sort of start to take off, or did it help hone some of those skills to kind of channel that energy?
I mean, at the end of the day, like sort of between 15 and 19, I was an artist, and that I just did photography because I loved it. And I just I photograph all day, process all night, print, go out again. But then I needed to get a job, and I got a job as a photographer's assistant. And I was very lucky that I got a job with this woman who was the top photographer in the city, fashion photographer, which is really, really lucky. And but from the day I got the job, I was never an artist again. I was a professional artist in that I get paid for what I do. So professional artists have clients, and that's a difference. If I decide to paint a painting, I'm not, that's my art. No one's telling me what to do. It's all on me, right? There's no censor. There's no brief. But professional artists, and there's a big struggle in the world of that because some people's egos get in the way of that, and they go, you're ruining if they recut the film, you're like, that's my art, but it's not really. If you really think about it, it's slightly different. So I became a professional artist, let's say, around 19 when I got my first job, and that was so I did an apprenticeship into fashion photography, and then I was a fashion photographer and a rock photographer for about probably 5 or 6 years. And then I started to make music videos, and I could experiment. And then for a little while, like directors in music videos, it's really no one cares. They want you to kind of go mental. So you learn a lot, and it's very artistic. You find different ways of expressing yourself within it. And then TV commercials, it starts to kind of come down on you a little bit because there's clients. Mm-hmm. And at this point, like, there's not an awful lot of sport going on. There's only just work. Then as you get into working with bigger bands, that's like how, because they're spending so much more money on their campaigns, they become like clients. So you get back into that world of clients. And so it was really only like around 29 that I kind of started picking up my sport again.
Right.
Yeah.
How did it start with you finding the lads at U2, and how did that relationship come about?
It was it was fairly straightforward. I mean, it's a small town, and I had made my first video for this band called the Golden Horde, and at the time, so it was just a straightforward music video, performance video against a white psych. But it was dynamic, and they're really cool and they're really dynamic. So it was just a kind of nice synergy of the two talents coming together. And then U2 had come to the end of the kind of their first period, that anthem period where, like Joshua Tree, up to Joshua Tree, and they decided that they were going to change their image and their music style quite significantly, and they were going to go more kind of rock, not sleazy rock, but more rock and roll rock, more badass, and less of the flag flying, and so they needed help with that. And I just happened to be a fashion photographer who was making cool videos in Dublin, and they saw the video I did and went, "That's the video we want for our video." Wow. And I was like, "Whoa, okay. Well, I tell you what, I can't do that because you'll crush those guys because they're just like a local band. Right. You guys are huge, so I can't do that. It wouldn't be fair. But I'll do you another version of it. Like I'll do you the black version instead of the white version, right?" Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that started that, and then because of my, the fashion work I'd done and that old sensibility, and my mum was a seamstress and a wedding dress designer, I came up through. I had quite a sensibility for the fashion of it all and the cool of it all. So I ended up kind of getting involved in styling them a little bit. And at the time of the October Baby album, which is the album where they switched, it was like there was a gang of us who were just like a creative hub, and we were all contributing in different ways and working on it. So, I did some stuff on the album. I did some album cover stuff. I found the glasses and for Bono's, all that stuff. And I did a little bit of work on the stage design, just all like little bits of contribution here and there, but nothing that I'd go, "Oh, by the way, I do this," which wasn't really like that. It was more just like a creative hub. Right. Because they were finishing the album at the same time.
And did you find that throughout this process that you ever got burnt out, that you went through phases where you had some sort of creative blackness or, anything like that, where you, how would you go away and recharge? Because one thing I've noticed in my creativity is I recharge by being outside and being active, like having that fluidity, that flow, that movement, and that seems to recharge my creativity. How do you recharge yours?
Well, if we're talking about this in the timeline, at that particular time in my 20s, I didn't. I just went flat out. There was no recharge. There was nothing. It was just flat out. Just couldn't get enough. Never stopped working. Never took a day off. Work, God, every hour I could. And I remember it was a kind of a moment. So I met my girlfriend and partner on the first video as she was an editor, and I realized. She was saying, "Why didn't you?" And I was like, I'd bring her the thing, getting all excited. She'd go, "You didn't shoot that. You didn't shoot a wide shot. You didn't shoot a close. Why didn't you not?" And I'm like, "Holy shit!" And she was gorgeous. And I was like, "What am I going to do? I need to impress this chick." So I'd listen, write down the notes, and the next video I'd come in and I'd have to rush this. Go, "What do you think of these?" But I was actually learning to direct through her notes, and we started working really intensely as a couple, and. We did a YouTube video and a Ver video back to back because we couldn't let either of the bands down because we did all their stuff. Well, we didn't do all the stuff, but when they came a knocking, you didn't, you had to do it. And it was just a perfect storm of two jobs. And we went, I think we went 5 days straight in an edit suite without a break, without a sleep.
Oh,
Wow.
And it was brutal. It was really brutal. I'd come off a shoot and it felt like there was maggots eating my bones. It was that kind of horrible.
Oh.
And I always remember it. And after that, we kind of looked at one and went, we can't ever do that again. That's just too much. You know, so that was
funny because like with you, Richie, you're definitely sort of all or nothing. You're sort of all in or you're all out in a way. That's like your personality, not dissimilar to mine, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like when you do something, that is it. That is your world. And you know, it's interesting because when we've spoken to you before and you've been like up in Mammoth doing some big snowboard trek or whatever it is, you know, you've been up to, it's sort of the same, right? It's almost like you go hammer and tongs until you can't go anymore.
Sort of do, yeah. Unfortunately, I'm a bit like that. So, you know, if I go drinking, I go drinking. If I go snowboarding, I go snowboarding. Yeah, because I mean, that's where for me, the fun is in that area, that fucking end zone when you're in there 100%. And it's a great, I mean, the thing is like later, I mean, there was a kind of a moment with my 20s was intense because, you know, myself and my partner were living together, editing together, partying together. It was full on. And it was a kind of a moment when we had this huge row. And she said, we haven't had a break for 2.5 years. And I went, whoa, really? And then I saw, fuck, you're right. We haven't even had a day off. We've just been going at this. So, then that was a kind of a penny dropped, you know. I got shingles from stress, and that kind of gave me a bit of a kick in the teeth. And that from that point on, I just went, hang on a second, there's more to life than just work. And then I got back into sport, and then I started. But when I got back into sport, I would compartmentalize. I go, right, I'm going snowboarding. That's it. And I would shut down everything. No work, no nothing, just snowboard. And be the best I can at it. And that was when I started to do recharges, as you would say.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's interesting, I think, when you look at sort of creativity, how you come up with ideas, the psychology behind it. And, you know, certainly for me, I'm probably... when I'm all in sport and I'm building up for a race, it's very hard to be creative because I kind of assume this alter ego that a lot of people know that I have, which is sort of badass. I don't care what anyone thinks. I almost don't allow for myself to dig into the fears and the weakness and the inner demons of my soul. And so that almost means that my creativity goes out the window, because I find that when I'm most creative is when I'm digging in my soul and I'm figuring out, what do I believe in? Who am I? And that's often, you know, actually during quite intense sessions, that don't have pressure on them, if that makes any sense. I don't know about you, like when you're doing sport, do you consciously or subconsciously sort of like dig in deeper when you're in moments of extreme, whether it's pain or fear or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, you mean like what you do, there's such a goal involved, right?
Yep.
That you've got to really manage yourself and your training and your nutrition, and you've got even how you focus. It's so intense. You're a world champion many times, and that's a certain way you go through sport, I think. I would be the other. I would be the mini version of that in terms of if I decide I'm going to climb that mountain, I'll get to the top, right? But it's much more. It's still recreational on my behalf. I'm not a professional competitor, but. Well, I mean, you know, what's interesting is I was thinking about this creativity in sport is that there's very little creativity in sport in one sense because you need to train and discipline. If you look at a gymnastic, they're going through exact precise motions, repeating. It's the same with a lot of sports, right? So, and you train sport specific, whether it's tennis or snowboarding or whatever it is. But where I find there's a little bit of creativity, which is interesting, and I was trying to find it for what I do. Like, you know, when I moved out of motorcycle racing into snowboarding, and the like being at the top of a mountain and knowing you don't, like, especially if you don't know the mountain, and just going, right, I'm going, right, and you don't know it, and you just drop it, and all you've got is a set of skills. Right, and an instinct, and that's all you got, right? Well, of course you're fit to a level and you've got the right fitness, but that's all you've got. It's sort of like playing certain games. You get into a zone, right? And once you get in the zone, you're really unstoppable, right? And you light it up.
Don't you find that's the same though when you're on set and you're directing? And so much as a lot of the magic comes in the intuition, as long as you have developed the skills enough to let that intuition come through. So in many ways, standing at the top of a hill is almost the same as standing on a set, thinking, okay, what's this shot going to be about? Where am I going to find my magic?
Well, the biochemistry is the same, actually. If you look at how the brain rewards and pushes towards activities, it's dopamine based, right? And dopamine helps turn off the adrenaline-fueled sympathetic nervous system in many ways. And so when you've got a full-in intensive career, or you're going 5 days without sleep, or Lesley's in a very intensive training phase, I wonder if you almost have to find the release, the dopamine release for the pleasurable activities or the searching towards things you don't know about. That has to be equally extreme to turn off something that's also very extreme. That's probably a really butcher of the science, but that might sort of, because people like you two, you're sort of not built the way most of us are built, right? It's like all in when you're sort of relaxing or chilling out, or when you're in on work mode, it's all in. So the pleasure and the work are both equally all in.
Very similar.
Yeah, I mean, I find that I go in phases. I have to kind of chunk up or segment days or weeks or months, right? I mean, you essentially do that, Richie, by saying, okay, I'm going away on a snowboarding trip or whatnot, but I'm kind of chunking up my days into in moments of stress and intensity.
Yeah.
You know, coupled with moments of trying to relax and trying to sort of recharge. And by going back and forth, that's where I actually find my best ideas for scripts or stories, is when I've kind of stressed myself to the point of the inner soul. And then I've backed off. I've found this place of kind of recovery, and it lets me access that idea. And it's almost like those 2 points coming together create this spark. And I'll be like, say, stretching or rolling or performing a mundane task post a hard workout. And I'll be like, boom, all of a sudden an idea pops in my head. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been trying to figure this out for ages.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting is that the relationship between like creativity and sport. So scientists have been trying to get to the bottom of these sorts of things. We know that, exercise has lots of psychological benefits, some of which are people more creative, they're more innovative, they think in new ways, find unique solutions and so on, but they don't know why. And all of the solutions, all of the mechanisms or theories at the moment are very long-term, based on things like, you might have heard of brain neurotropic factors and all these things that generate neurons in the brain that stimulate parts of the brain that help. But that wouldn't explain the sort of flashes of creativity or flashes of new solutions, other than it has to be a neurotransmitter related. It has to be like dopamine related or something like that. I wonder if that's
I think certainly when it comes to my training and my sport, you've always got goals and targets. Maybe we're doing interval training, maybe we're trying to get to the top of the mountain, or for you, Richie, getting to the bottom of the mountain. So when you achieve that little goal, you're getting that dopamine surge, right? So that's kind of maybe
that's
freeing,
also pushing you towards the goal. Right?
No, it is. But in terms of creativity, I think that release is helping with the creativity.
I mean, creativity is a whole conversation in a way, because there's different levels of it and layers to it, and it's a three-dimensional thing, if you know what I mean. Like, Lesley, what you're talking about, like the idea. Okay, how long? Okay, someone says, okay, go off and come up with an idea for minis, right? For mini cars, right? For an ad, and you go, okay, so how do you have an idea? You don't squeeze it out. You don't go, okay, I'm going to sit down and have an idea. It just doesn't really work like that. They just kind of arrive, and sometimes when you don't expect it. But I have noticed that in that sort of department of creativity, the original idea, right, that can spark. Because once you have that, then everything builds off of that, right? I used to train a lot here in the house. I'm a cross trainer and really pushing myself. It was a fitness program I was doing. So I'd come off that after an hour. And particularly if it was an anaerobic workout,
yes.
The minute I'd sit down afterwards with my pad and I'd just start writing.
Mate, I'm the same.
Shit would flow out of me. And then I would come back to it hours later and try to continue, and it's not the same.
Well, I think there's something to be said for when you push yourself to that anaerobic level, there's like a freedom that happens sometimes where the sheer movement, the sheer intensity, the blood flow, the sort of mental, you have to kind of almost give up. I don't know, you're at a point of almost failure on that sort of a stuff. So it's almost like you have this clear path that open, do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it just kind
of
opens
it's interesting because when you talk about these sorts of issues, I'm always as like the science brain in me is trying to think about why. And so one thing, it might be that we know adrenaline is the sort of the opposite to creativity. The more adrenaline you have, it's harder to be creative. We know this. And so I wonder whether...
Well, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, you're sort of exhausted. You've kind of like... You're
exhausted it out, that it sort of uses it all up the adrenaline.
So that could be a reason why, to get to extreme exhaustion, you finally like open the gate of creativity because you live in this agitated state constantly, right? Because as an athlete.
Yeah. And I don't know about you as well, Richie. In fact, mate, can you just tilt up your camera here? Awesome. We love seeing up your nose, honestly. That's right. I'll look at those bonny locks.
He's a cinematographer as well. I mean, come on now. Get your head in front.
Oh my God.
The thing I love about what I got into, so when I used to race motorcycles, and that's sort of that's an adrenaline-based sport. And when I gave it up, that's when I started fighting competitive. Started training and learning martial arts, and that led to that in itself was sort of boring. But the sparring and then the competitions were great. I got a really bad concussion in the European Championships, and I got to the semi-finals, but I was taken out really badly. I got the concussion in the first round. I was just fighting with a concussion. I didn't know it, and I kind of went, you know what? My day job is directing. This is fucking me up. So I'm going to have to stop. So I stopped. Yeah. And then that's when I took up snowboarding. The thing about competitive fighting is that no matter how good you are, first of all, you're not. There's always somebody better, tougher, harder. And when you go out and you stand in front of your opponent, you look at them and all you know is that person, all they want to do is really hurt you, right? And you've got to really like mutton down and get, you got to hang in there. If that rattles you, you're done, right? Yeah. So when I got into snowboarding, I love the speed. It's like motorcycles without the engine because it's very similar movement to motorcycles, but instead of an engine, the momentum of the mountain is your engine, right? But I found myself getting bored, and then I drifted into the park, and then I started going, getting into jumps and stuff. And then I discovered fear. And once I found fear, I was kind of happy. That's when I kind of got addicted, because what I find is I'd sit there and I'd look at this tabletop jump and I'd never gone off anything that size. And I could sit for a week fucking willing myself to do it. And invariably what would happen is on the last day when I have to go, I go, fuck it, I'll do it now. I'm not going to have done it this season. I just go. Right. So, but it's like kind of conquer that fear because with snowboarding at that kind of level, if you go at it, a 10-meter jump, and you've got to go at it like really cocky. You got to be Conor McGregor going at that. I'm the best, I'm the greatest. Because if you don't have that in your head, you're gonna destroy yourself in the jump. Like you need it, and so you have to really kind of get to that point with it that you're not afraid.
That's super interesting that you kind of seek out fear, right? Seek out a way to kind of challenge yourself in some way. And I'm the same. It doesn't matter whether it's a jump, whether it's a gnarly downhill mountain bike, or whether it's a fitness fear that I can't hang on to that group, or, maybe I could do more volume, or maybe I could this or that. Racing kind of is, you're always on the start line with just so much fear. And I wonder if seeking out that fear satisfies something in me that allows me to, again, kind of dive into question.
Yeah.
And kind of challenge my brain or get into some sort of introspection that can help.
I think we might need a little bit of therapy, both of us, from Simon here, because
I know, right? I'm listening to the two of you like, Jesus, I need a bigger net for you two.
I remember going up to Alaska to do some heliboarding in Alaska, I'd never done anything like that in my life. I was on my own, and I just did it, and it was so tough. It was so tough. But it was the only time I was really scared was like looking at Alaska as we were flying in, and like I was talking to some oil rig guy, and I was looking out the window, and all you see is just ice mountains that just went to the North Pole, and I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing here? Like, this is out of my comfort zone. That's what I was looking for. I was looking for that, you know.
When we talk about courage and bravery in this sort of sense, not in the real sense of life. Well, I suppose in that sense your life is on the line, but it's interesting because the paradigm in psychology has shifted in the last sort of 5 to 10 years and especially we know this when you look at people who are a bit scaredy cats or stay in their comfort zone. They look at the sensation seekers or the people who do this crazy stuff and, oh my God, I could never do that. I'm scared. And they think that these people don't feel fear. And we know they do. It's just that people are good and learn that whether they're like that, they've learned it through their upbringing or they've taught themselves to jump hand in hand with your fear. And once you're in it, and when we talk to special ops teams, or when we talk to like free climbers or really base jumpers, they all use the same sort of language. They don't say that they're not scared. They've learned the skills to go with them. But when they're in the moment, they're so focused on executing a process, the sequence of skills that have been learned so well. So they're not thinking about, oh my God, any time I could die now. But beforehand, they might be thinking that. After the fact, they might be thinking that. But in the moment, they're so geared. And you often talk about that.
I think for me, challenging the fear is by building the best system possible to focus on the process of excellence to get you to the place where you can face that fear and know that you can challenge it. It's almost like fear represents that baddie that you're going, into the cage with to fight, but you've got all the best tools. So you're sort of like, if I'm really prepared for Worlds, or I'm like, okay, this is it. I know I've done everything. The body's starting to really move. Everything is lined up and I've done everything kind of perfectly. And but what's interesting with building that system for sport is it's helped me build a system within the world of creativity. Now, as you well know, Richie, because we've written a script with you that you're going to direct, and we can talk about that later. But in terms of writing a script, that's the huge kind of a dichotomy or thing that is very challenging is building a system within something that needs to be original, unique, creative, right? But I think with having come from such a structured sports background, with many obstacles where I've had to be flexible within that system.
That flexibility, actually, it's interesting because like you can learn, it's like, they say with script writing, you learn the rules and then you learn to break them and that, that thing and the writer struggling and that sort of freedom, a writer can get that 20 minutes of gold and all that, where you just get into a flow, you break through a writer's block. I find that there's a correlation between all these and that. Like, you can learn with a sport, you can learn all the rules and you can go, okay, I know how to be balanced, I know how to do, if you're snowboarding or if it's on your cycle or whatever it is, you can learn, you can train all those skill sets up and you go, okay, with the skill sets I have here, I can tackle that. Okay. So, but what I find interesting is that's not enough, that you need to train your instincts as well. And you need to trust your instincts. And so it's like, if you're fighting on a street, you don't know, suddenly you go, whoa, this guy might stab me. Some people might run, fear fight, the 3 Fs, right? With snowboarding, it's the same. With any of the sports I've ever done, motorcycle racing, it's the same. You're in the zone, as you said, Lesley, in that you're just in it and you're exercising, or you're going through the motions of what you know and your body function can do best with this sport. But there's also, every time you got hurt or made a mistake, your brain is registering experience, and that's honing your instincts, because your instincts are critical. And it's that classic thing of if you feel it in your gut, that's go with it, right? And that translates to me into directing and into writing. In that is like, I'll sit and I'll write something, and I'm kind of writing by the numbers a little bit. And then I'll get into the zone and something will just come out and I'll just go with it. And I don't even think about it. I just write what's coming out. And I'm in that sort of zone, the same as that instinct zone.
Yeah.
It's like, I often say to people when they're learning to drive a car, look, just drive in a fucking straight line. Now slam on the brakes as hard as you can, because it's better to know what you're going to do now and not when somebody walks out in front of the car. So if you know what I mean by that, it's like
totally. And I think that's one of the biggest issues we often have with many of the athletes that we coach, or even myself included, is everything has become so data driven and very sort of specific and structured that the instinct is almost lost, right? So that I think the magic comes when you have built the skill, when you have the fitness, when you have all of that structure that's kind of been ticked off, so to speak, and then you've let that all go and allowed the instinct to come through. That's where the golden stuff, that's where my best races have happened, where you're not worried about that number. But you have to practice that. So my creativity in screenwriting and writing, in acting, that's all helped my sport to be able to sort of release and kind of let go, think outside the box as well, because you have to practice how you're going to come about finding that intuitiveness. And for me, it's often whether it's being on different trails that I don't know, being around other people that I don't know how they're going to react, kind of saying that the session today is purely about, say, keeping up with a group I've never ridden with before. You don't know how fast it's going to be. You don't know how slow it is. You don't know the right turn, the left turn. But what it does is it builds this kind of fight mechanism in you, this ability to be flexible. So definitely working in the arts has helped that, but concurrently being in sport and having that structure has allowed me, when I'm in the moments of darkness, when I'm trying to be creative and I'm having a block, to say, okay, let's break this down. You know, how can I find a system that will help release me? Mm-hmm. So it kind of works both ways, right? Having a system to release and having a release to create a system. It's sort of like...
The sport doesn't really encourage that. I mean, sports become such a science-based discipline over the last 20 years. And so we don't do, in writing, you turn on your intuitive brain. I mean, simplifying the science there, or conceptual brains. But we don't really do that in sport. We don't teach like intuitive things for tactics. And that's really when cycling is one of my passions. And when you look at differences between some of the European riders, the Italians and the Spanish especially, and you contrast that with the Americans, the Brits, the Germans, they race tactically very differently. And partly because of how they've been brought up, how you're socialized into the sport. So the bit of a cliche, but the Italian cyclist mentality is that you attack, you might blow up. It's like the kind of go big or go home mentality. That's not a big simplification. But now we as Brits and Americans over here is so calculated, and we've lost this ability to respond intuitively. And that's an interesting thing, because we don't really coach that into people, do we?
No, and I think it has a huge impact on mental toughness, because I think if you always have parameters to where your performance might be, you're kind of restricted, right? Whereas if you're just sort of saying, hey, listen, today it's going to be keeping up with a group, or today it's going to be, I'm going to get up to the top of that mountain in my big chainring and the toughest gear, and I don't know what's going to happen. Not knowing what's going to happen sort of almost frees you up.
Well, that's why mountain biking is a lot different than road cycling, because you're having to react to an uncertain environment, particularly if you haven't ridden there before, where the road is the road, right? I mean, okay, there's not only so many different things that you can encounter on the road, but in a mountain bike is very different. And I think I'm just thinking about this, maybe
injuries as well.
Yeah, so maybe for many athletes, it's good to get them to do activities where they're very in unpredictable environments. And it makes most of them feel very uncomfortable. But that might be because we just so sort of squash down that ability to think, because we're all trained on, TSS scores or drills or minutes or intervals or RPM or heart rate or power zones, versus feeling the terrain and knowing how to respond.
Have you found, Richie, that being out snowboarding, being out in the mountains, any sort of visual stuff that you do on an active level, has that impacted how you construct a shot when you're directing?
Not a shot. No, it wouldn't. Not a shot, because, well, I mean, okay, there's a couple of interests. I was trying to think of some examples of this that might be interesting. There's, in terms of, because I kind of like extreme sports, I started pushing to see could I shoot extreme sports, but in the world that I do things in. So in my world at the time, it would have been for that the only place would say TV commercials. So I kind of got a little bit of a reputation for shooting sports, and I did well at it specifically because I would go and learn the sport, so I would understand where the camera should be. I'd understand what, let's say if it's the choreography or something, I understand the moments within that choreography that speak to the people who are doing it visually. So as if someone who does it is filming it, right? So I shot some big wave surfing ads, and I went out for 2 days in the water and nearly died a couple of times and all that sort of stuff, nearly drowned. And like a couple of times the surfers were like, oh, come on, you can do it. And it was a 50-foot wave, and I was so close to just getting on a 50-foot wave, having never surfed, because I just went, I can do that. That's like snowboarding, right? And they were like, yeah, come on, because they were rising. And then the producers were like, no way, are you going out there? Like, and they were right. I could have drowned. And so I got into shooting a lot of sports. Like I've done NFL, and I've done snowboarding, cross-country skiing, soccer. What else have I done? Diving, free base jumping. I've done a lot of them, right? And like, I used to get them to hang me out of helicopters, and with my camera, and I'd fly around. And I just loved the fact that the filming I was doing felt like a sport, in itself. And so I got a buzz out of that. And at the end of the day, I liked connecting with the people who were doing the sport, because I could relate to them. Right. And even funny enough, very quickly, I had a great conversation, and you relate to this, was that I realized that at a certain point I'd got to a certain level of snowboarding that I didn't want to risk starting another sport and get a stupid injury that you get when you start sports, right? That would put me out for a season. So I suddenly turned into a bit of a wuss. I wouldn't surf, I wouldn't cycle, because I wanted to preserve myself and all my training for snowboarding, right.
Makes
so
perfect
that was a kind of an interesting moment. And then I mean, the only other place where creativity kind of seeped through there in terms of shots or filming that was interesting was I did this ad for Guinness back in 1994, and it was a very big ad at the time. It was basically, all it was a guy dancing around a pint of Guinness, right? Mm-hmm. And he's doing this dance to this music, right? It just took off, the music, the way he danced, and it just became really big. But one of the, I can identify why it worked, and it was a process that I went through. So I had him. This was just a guy. I just liked the look of him. I just thought, that guy, sort of cartoon-like, he's the guy. So now I need to teach him to dance. So I got a ballet dancer to teach him to ballet dance in 3 weeks, intensively, right? To the song that we were going to cut the ad to, okay? And so he did, and he worked really hard at it, and he got it really good, and he did it all. And then on the day, when he showed up on set, I went, oh no, we're not using that music today. That's in the past, right? We're going to use Too Drunk to Fuck by the Dead Kennedys, and some Jerry Lee Lewis country and western song, and Somewhere Over the Rainbow, right? And he went into shock and says, look, come on, let's go. Like turn on the music. Let's go. You got to do this. And so what had happened was he had learned a whole set of rules, right? And he could pirouette, and he could do certain moves, and, he could do all that. But he did it. He learned all the music. He had developed a skill set to dance. And all I needed to do now was break that programming and let him be free. And so the minute he got into it, and suddenly he started dancing to the Dead Kennedys with this skill set, a whole other style of dancing came out of him. And that style of dancing ended up being what made it so popular. And it was so popular that they used to have Guinness dancing competitions or in pubs, and it was mad to see who could dance like him.
We have to put a link now on the podcast notes to it must be on YouTube, that ad still, for people to see. Yeah,
you look up Guinness Anticipation, it's called.
Wow. But what's fascinating about that is, finding that place where you can be released from your structure. And I think that whether that's in sport, in your relationships, in, your business, whatever it is, right? Often you hit that block where you almost can't go, you're caught by all of your baggage essentially, and you kind of need to release it. And I mean, that's what happened to me in sport, in so much as I was really competitive when I was younger, thought that I was going to go to the Olympics, the whole bit, and then retired when I was like 21, moved here and studied a master's degree in acting. And so it was almost like that was my release, right? Yeah. Through acting, I was able to figure out maybe sort of my more emotional side, who I was as a person, and then come back to the sport of triathlon with a different approach. That was maybe more right for me. So I think like that's almost what the story you're telling is, like a microcosm of life, isn't it?
This is where I find I really like functionality in life. I love it. I love functional medicine, functional training. Because everything's connected, everything's tied together. You know, I did this ayahuasca retreat last year for a week, and I kind of. Some of the stuff I saw and the connections I made I could see the sort of architecture of everything, of life, let's say, in nature, and I realized it's all I saw was this interconnectivity was a really big part of it, and like whatever you learn, you know, what you were building for Lesley for training to be an Olympian, you don't lose that. It's just you build on that, and how can that make what you're learning now more interesting, or change it, or develop it? And the more we go through life and the wiser we get, the more we can add that all together, and suddenly you can start to see things from a totally different perspective. And I think creative place to be.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people see, whether it's those distractions or those times where things have not gone right, or where they're in another direction or doing other things, they might see them as, I'm not on my path to, you know, fulfilling the goal that I set or whatever it might be, and they see it as a bad thing. When in actual fact, if you can sort of embrace that change as an enlightenment in some way, right? Or a way to kind of pivot and see something differently that you could never have anticipated.
Well, our brains are, you know, they're wired for linear thinking, right? Like, and sport training is often considered to be linear, but actually the people who become really good at it, and it's not just sport, they are innovative in that process, in that journey. And the metaphor we always use with athletes that really came out of Lesley saying, oh my God, if I want to be like this kind of athlete, I have to be like them or do the training they've done. And that's not actually the case at all. So we often say success is not a ladder, it's a cargo net, right? There's lots of different ways to get there. And your own journey is I mean, to be able to take a cargo net journey, you have to know what the ladder is as well, right? Know the rules to break the rules. And I think that's what you've done over time, but it takes a long time to be able to get there.
Well, I think you're always going back and forth between your intuition, you do something and it works out well, right, and then you learn something and you're like, oh my God, what I was doing was actually sort of quote unquote the rules, so to speak. And that's sort of why we ended up writing the book that we did, because essentially I'd done a lot of these things in my sport naturally, and then I was able to put the science to it and say, well, this is the reason why, and this is probably why you went in that direction or went in that direction, and that's what was fascinating. Often our intuition actually simultaneously lines up with the with the rules.
This is Simon, this is your department, but which I'd love to hear what you think, because certainly I'm to certain, like, to get to a certain point, you need to have a sort of certain metal in you. Like, what I know for sure it's in Lesley. I have it because I know I can go to the gym and push myself to the place that a trainer normally has to take someone to, because I'm so competitive with myself that I'll burn myself out. Like, if I say I'm going to get to 10, I will not. I'll burst my heart and I'll get there, right? But not everybody's like that. I'm kind of interested in the psychology behind that. I was like, what's going on in our brains that makes us do that?
Yeah, in fact, psychologists have studied that concept that you're talking about. They call it the growth or fixed mindset. It was really a Stanford psychologist called Carol Dweck who wrote a book about this, and they started off looking at how young kids learn. But it's since been translated into other disciplines. And the essence of a growth mindset is, I'm not good at this yet, right? Versus I'm not good at that. I can't learn languages. I'm not an outdoor adventurer, but I'm not good at this yet. And that philosophy or approach to things in life, whether it's doing problems that are perhaps unsolvable, or you may know that you may never get the answer to, or do things that are so impossible, it doesn't become about whether you actually achieve it or not. It's the fact that you get this little dopamine response. You're reinforced, your body, you're neurochemically being reinforced by trying and making progress towards something. And this is the sort of the in love with the process, in love with the journey. You've got to be in love with the training, not just the racing. But that's really the essence of it. And if there was one lesson that we've learned about what we're trying to engineer with athletes, is to change at a fundamental level their relationship with failure. And what that means, and we just need a better word than failure, actually. But no one's really have yet to find one that kind of works. But it is about, if we can get people to think, I'm just not good at this yet, but I'm working at it and I'm seeing progress, and get addicted to that philosophy about anything that you tackle is really critical. Unfortunately, we're in a world where we look up to people who have achieved these
comparison.
Things. If I can never do that, what's the point in trying?
Right.
And those people who have a fixed mindset, that is, talents, attributes, skills, are sort of set in stone. And we all vacillate to a certain extent with these things. Like I started to learn the piano, but for years I was like, oh, I'm not musical. I was the jock. I'm not the musician. But why not? You can learn. And yes, it becomes harder to learn a little bit as you get older, as the brain ages, but you can always learn. But switching that into I can develop the skills to be good at this is something that we really need to all of us get better at. Now, you guys have probably found it.
I think I find it naturally, like we call it rewarding the effort.
Right.
And that's those little rewards along the way are what remotivate you to keep on going. And that's kind of essentially the basis of your motivation. I reckon for me, it was growing up very much in that Scottish culture, that Celtic culture where nothing is ever good enough. And certainly, when my dad, right, go on a world title and it's, your run time wasn't as quick as so-and-so, or,
you didn't win by
that sort of a thing. So, if you're going to survive and still enjoy, be healthy and want to continue, you have to create your own system of being motivated, because I wasn't getting it from the world around me.
Lesley's a really great example of a growth mindsetter who probably grew up in a fixed mindset approach to sport, right?
Yep, very much so.
But we all do this. I mean, this growth fixed mindset is even translated into parenting. And of course, when a kid, a bit of a cliche, but a kid paints something coming from school, oh my God, you're so clever, you're so talented, or you're so beautiful. These are all outcomes versus, oh my God, you must have spent a lot of time doing this, and you're rewarding the sense of effort. And so we get these little subtle cues as we grow older or grow up that reinforce fixed mindsets and never really, oh my God, isn't it amazing to fail? Because the word failure is wrong. And when they looked at these kids in schools who were addicted to solving problems that were not solvable. They knew they weren't solvable. It's like the kids who love doing like math puzzles or really hard crosswords, or it's not about getting it done. It's about, I love the fact that I'm being challenged. And how do you translate that into sport or creative art?
Well, I remember, while we were writing, Fighting Charity is a script that we're working on with you, Richie, and hoping to get that off the ground. But when we were writing that project with you, it was really interesting. Often you would say, let's just throw that all away. Let's not get locked into a specific idea. Let's just put that to the side and brainstorm on something completely different. And in many ways, that's encouraging that growth mindset, because you get so fixed on it has to be this way. I've kind of locked into this, and that was, Simon and I often say it when we're writing now, like, remember what Richie said. Yeah. Why does it have to be that? Throw that out the window and let's start afresh with something completely new and see what we can come up with.
Yeah. And do it in sport as well. The sort of drills or sessions that Lesley sets are fairly unconventional. People have never heard of them or done them before. And partly it's the physiology of them, but it's really about upending how that whether you're good at something. Because if you have got nothing to compare it to, because you've never done this before, you can start to change the way that you feel about it. And I imagine the segue for you, I'd love to be interested to hear about when you got the Siege of Jadotville movie off the ground, which is on Netflix, one of my favorite films as well. I hope our audience gets a chance to watch it. But when you got that, there must have been some of that fixed mindset, like deep imposter thoughts in you, like, oh my God, I'm now got this big responsibility. And how did you kind of get out of your own way so that you could end up with the film that you made?
I mean, interestingly enough, that was a first time movie, right? As a director, if I had got that movie as a first time movie when I was like 26, I would have fucked it up totally, right? And what would have fucked it up was my ego, because when you're a young director, you're on the spotlight, right? And so you become like a megalomaniac. You won't, even though people are giving you good ideas, it's like, no, it's mine, it's mine, it's mine. If it's not all me, it's not me, I'll be judged, and it's all that stuff, and it's all ego, right? And and so I went through all that when I was younger. I was a nightmare. I was a nightmare director. I wouldn't let anybody do anything. I was camera, I was, it's like, but as you get older and you sort of, you evolve, you start to understand that, like, hang on a second, I don't always have the best ideas. And the 10 ideas that come at me, your skill set as a director is to go, actually, those two actually really work for what we're doing, and have the humble humanity, or I suppose, or be humble enough to accept, okay, well, it was the sound guy, or it was the makeup, or it was the whoever gave you the idea, and go, thanks, I'm going to use that. And that was a great idea, and not to let your ego get in the way. And so, because like that's a big movie as a first time movie, and and the only reason I made it was because of my age. I was mature enough to not let my ego get in the way. And I was sort of assisted a little, well, not a little bit, a lot, by the fact that I also realized the story that I was telling was a true untold story. And there was 150 men who were really shafted by our government and army. And some of them are still alive, like 48 of them are still alive. And they're all old now. They'd never been recognized for this. And I had a huge responsibility to tell their story. And that had to be the most important thing. So there was no room for ego. That was the ego, if you know what I mean. That was the top. And so anytime something would challenge me in any way, I would go, no, it's got to be about the story. So sometimes, I get a hammering from something, and normally a director would just fight back and go, no, and dig in, even though they, like, Ridley Scott did it on Blade Runner. He refused to put in a VO, right? That's the only real difference in the director's cut, is he took the VO out, right? And at the end of the day, it's like, well, what told the best story for the audience? But ego gets in there. And so I was kind of lucky in a way that I didn't get to make it until I was a bit older.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, this is consistent with there's a whole movement of self-help books about, having fewer fucks to give as you get older, and how to unpack your suitcase of fucks so that you become a little bit more freer. And that happened in Lesley's sport career. Certainly the way that she dealt when she won her first world title in XTERRA, she wouldn't have been able to do that in her early 20s. And maybe that just does come, I think you can learn that and speed that up, but I think that does come a little bit with age and experience and some wisdom as well. You don't care as much.
Well, I think probably, the reason I've been in the sport as long as I have and still managed to have success and win another world title, 7 years later, is because it's a very supportive husband, of course, is learning to let it go and not to care what people think, not worry about how I'm perceived or that ego stuff, right? Let that all go and find the kind of purity of it, or the whys behind it. Finding the why behind it is huge. It's like you find the why behind it for Jadotville, right?
But letting it go, a funny little anecdote here. We've done this with a couple of runners who are so obsessed and uptight about a particular event. It might just be a local 10K, but all the people, the locals there, and if you don't do a good time, everyone will know or think that I'm not as good as they thought they were, whatever. And we've actually forced people to miss the start. We deliberately say, we go to the porta potty, let the gun go off, and you have to wait in there 3 minutes before you're allowed to come out or go across the start line. And this is like madness. No, they don't ever think of this. But the psychology of it is that you're now running, playing catch up. You're still getting a chip time across, and it was when you chip, start to finish.
Oh, yeah.
But that psychology of not being in the mix, you're now, I'm just now running. And it's incredible, the breakthrough psychologically that some athletes have when you force them, you change the rules on them, and they're not allowed to use all those anchors for, am I doing well? How am I doing relative to others? Because we've forced you to miss the start. And you get some quite amazing breakthroughs by doing that.
Well, I think that's where, again, developing both of our creativities has helped us approach the science of sport in a different way, because we're thinking about that mind-body connection, the impact of one versus the other, and clever ways to manipulate your brain to get the best out of your body, right?
That's the Guinness Dancing Man scenario I told you about.
Right.
Yeah.
Isn't it? It's the same thing, you know?
It is. And I think this is a great time or an opportunity to sort of put a nice caption on this, because this is, I'm conscious of your time as well.
Okay, for 2 minutes. I'm looking at quarter to if you need to talk. It's fine. So I've got a few minutes.
Keep going a bit more then, because I'm enjoying this. Yeah,
That's right, mate. We just need another couple of Guinnesses and you'll be flying.
So maybe you can talk us through that, on the Siege of Jadotville, the actual shooting itself. Not so much like what the story was or what you're doing, but your mindset during it. Are you sort of so sleep deprived at this point? How do you still be the best version of yourself in the moment? You've got these big actors in there. Jamie Dornan's in there. Mark Strong's in there. These are big name actors. So the responsibility, but how do you sort of get out of your own way when you're in the process? Because this is really the world championships if you're an athlete, or you're in a big event as an athlete. Do you remember how you kind of navigated that?
Yeah, the way I treated it was like, first of all, what's driving it all is it has to be the best I can possibly make it. That's driving everything, right? So when you're working back out of that, it's like, okay, I need to just pace myself. I gave up drinking, which was a big deal, but I went, I can't drink at all during this. So I went from like 2 bottles of wine a day to 0, and I went clean. I just worked. I did my notes in the evening time. I ate lightly and I slept, and I just went, I'm now in the army. I'm going into the army. I'm cutting off everything. And I just focused on this and nothing else. So I was just immersed in it in every way. Like, there was nothing else. So I didn't go out with the actors drinking, or I stayed away from any of that sort of stuff. I just went total focus for the 3 months that we were filming. And so then I knew that's the best I can possibly do. I can't do any better than that I can come up with. So that was kind of how I went into it. And then once you're in it, it's just an awful lot of management. It's a lot of problem solving. Because I was a first time director, even though I've been directing for 15 odd years, it's the first feature film. There was a bond on the movie. So the bond people would get memos every night. So my script supervisor is a lovely woman, Maureen. She would write down, okay, Richie arrived on set at 7 a.m., brief the actors, set the shot up, start shooting at 7:15, did 3 takes, second take he changed it to this, blah blah blah, took them, and the whole day is memoed, and you have a shot list to get through, say 20 shots, and that memo is sent off every night, and the Bond people check it in LA and in London, and if I start slipping shots, they're like, whoa, what's going on? So you're under that kind of pressure every day to make your day. And I knew at the start, that all eyes were on me, because they were, they saw me, never done drama. They're terrified of commercial directors. Commercial directors do 40 takes of something and then change their mind. Instead of shooting that, they go, no, I just saw something. I want to do that instead. They go over there, and no one's prepped for it. Movies don't work at that. So they're really nervous of all that. So my first week was all Mark Strong, and he's an amazing actor, and I just couldn't believe I was so lucky to even get to work with him, right? I made up my mind, like, no matter what, I'm going to do maximum 2 takes and move, and I'm going to do it whether I got the shot or not. I'm just do 1 to 2 takes and move. And that was it for the week. And I could feel the sense of relief after day 2 and after day 1 to just big, huge, we're going to be okay. This guy isn't going to go off course. And I did it deliberately to just get them all to fucking relax and leave me alone so I could really work. So that's a piece of advice I'd give to any director going into their first bonded movie.
But I mean, that's amazing that you were able to sort of take that intensity, that pressure, that structure, the imposed structure, and yet still be creative within that, right? Still let your ideas pop into your head, and still, be able to sort of see what an actor's doing or not doing, how to reposition a camera, editing it in your head, all of those kinds of things, which are very sort of creative and instinctual, right? So that's pretty impressive.
And being able to put your actors at ease. I mean, we've been on set for a few movies where first-time directors and take 29, and the actors are just like, for God's sake.
You lose.
You can see the whole attitude shift, right? And they're tired of it, and you're expecting to get great performances out of them. So that was a pretty
because you think of it, if you think about it, like those actors, they're going from set to set to set. They're on it. They're like doing it. I learned it working with Jeremy Irons. Like I was shooting with Jeremy Irons, and we did this take, and it was brilliant. Right, he played a Pope in the Borgias, and I said, and I was still a commercial director, and says, "Okay, man, we're going to do another take." And he goes, "Why?" And I was like, I was to say, "Oh, the focus puller just kind of missed it there a little bit, Jeremy. Go again." And he's like, "Okay, what size? This size, this size, this size." And he changed his performance.
Wow.
Like, so he's on it, like, and he's got. It's like two takes, 3 takes. That's it. That's all you're getting, and because he knows he's delivering.
Yeah.
You know, so you've got to man up to that straight away. And if you don't, they can smell it off you. Like they just can see the inexperience. So
the fact that you were able to step up and be flexible and to kind of meet his professionalism, and I think that that's
a good corollary in sport.
It is. I mean, you have to get in the start line, and sometimes your competitors, they've won so much more than you, that they're more experienced, that every other time they've beaten you, but you've still got to have a sense that you can make this happen, that you can stand up to them, or side by side with them, and so to speak, challenge them. I mean, it's the same on a set. If you're on a set with someone that's uber experienced, you've got to believe that you can, what you have to contribute is good enough.
Well, it's like, also letting athletes have those sessions that maybe from a physiological perspective are not the best sessions to do. Might be like the classic one in our world, this sort of group rides, where the session is dictated by what's going on in the group rather than I've got to get these intervals done. And many coaches, they say, okay, no group rides, no do this, no do that. And they forget, just like you were able to tune in with your actors, is that a relaxed, confident, a happy athlete is a much better proposition, has a much better chance of getting the other work done. So pick your battles, I guess, is one thing. And let athletes have a free rein, even though it might not be the best from a sports science perspective. It's good psychology for them. And we do this all the time, right? We coach Mal Mendez, who's a big professional Ironman athlete. He's the same. He needs to have this free rein to do this stuff, as opposed to just all about very driven, repetitive, structured stuff. And you've got to find that balance, and that's reading your athlete rather than being prescriptive about it, right?
Or reading your actor, or reading,
A lot of good corollaries there. I mean, directing is coaching as well, right? As well, your
people management.
I mean, what I did on Jadotville was, like on the day, the kind of the level of actors I had. You don't really tell them to do it. Oh, do it with a bit of a smile, or So what I did was I talked to them beforehand about their character and why they are thinking what they're thinking at any point in the movie, and I explained the arc of the movie to them so they understood why the story shifts and what's that's done to their journey. So I made myself available to talk to them for any amount of hours about it. Pre-shooting. On the day of the shooting, I never talked to them about acting at all. What I did was I held back on body language and how that can affect the power structure in a room. Say, for example, whether a guy decides to sit down and talk to the guy standing up, or whether he decides to go to the window and stare at it while he leaves the guy there, or how the body language in a room or in a frame. I'm saying a room, but it's in a frame. It can change the whole power dynamic in the frame. So I used to talk to them about body language and go, would it be interesting at this point if you walked past him and put your back to him because you're the more powerful man and you're throwing him off? That kind of idea. And I let that, and then when I gave them that to play with, it was like I gave them something new to go, oh, okay, so it breaks the freshness, or sorry, not the freshness. It breaks that kind of repetitive, they've got it in their head, they're locked. Okay, I'm going to go on and I'm going to do this. And it just loosens that up and makes it feel organic again, because that's the problem, is you can over-rehearse it in your head, and you need to be organic when you're live. And so I used body language discussions, nothing else. And I found it worked well, and they liked it. It was like, oh, well, okay, that's kind of new. It worked,
Oh, that's great.
So maybe you should come and coach some of our athletes, because some of those principles of figuring out how yeah, that's right, mate. A lot of overlap.
And I think many of our listeners now, they'll be like, okay, we're now hearing about this movie. What is this movie about? Can you give us a 20-second, 30-second little pitch of what Siege of Jadotville is actually about?
Siege of Jadotville it was set in during the Congo crisis in 1961, and it was about a battalion of 150 Irish soldiers who were working for the UN, who were sent into a town called Jadotville, which was in the Congo. Patrice Lumumba had just been assassinated, and the Congo had gone into chaos and civil war. And so these soldiers were sent to police this particular town. What they didn't realize was this town was a huge mining town. It was very rich in uranium and cobalt and copper, which are all massive Cold War minerals, let's say. Mm-hmm. And the Belgians and the French government had a 4,000 strong mercenary army guarding the mines, which had nothing to do with the civil war or Congo. They were just, while that was all going on, they were just siphoning all the minerals out of the country, right? And so the Irish marched into this and go, we're here to protect the town. And the mercenaries went, get out, on your bike. And you don't say that to Irish people, they just dig in. So it's like they dug in, and a siege happened. They got surrounded, and they were fighting for their lives. And they were all kids. Some of them as young as 16 had signed up for the army. And they just dug in and they fought, and the mercenaries couldn't get them out. And after 5 days and many negotiations, they agreed to a ceasefire. They'd killed about 400 of the mercenary soldiers, and none of the Irish had been killed because they dug trenches and they dug in like Alabama tigs, So they agreed to a ceasefire, and eventually they flew home to Ireland. But when they got back to Ireland, they were treated like cowards by the government and by the army, and they were basically told to never speak about it, and the whole incident was brushed under the carpet and never spoken about again for 55 years. And it's the only time an Irish army ever engaged an enemy on its own ever in history, and they kicked their arses, and they were ashamed of it. And so many of the soldiers died from alcoholism and just shame of what they brought back with them. Wow. And so then that's what the movie's about, basically.
And it's really so the
really
Siege of Jadotville on Netflix. If you get a chance to watch it, I really would encourage you. We loved it. We loved it before we even met you. We didn't even know that you had anything to do with it, so we loved it. Anyway, I think now is a good time. It's been a fantastic chat. We're glad you could join us from Dublin. We hope to see you in LA soon when you can fly again, or we over in Europe.
And we'll invite all our podcast listeners to the premiere of Fighting Charity when we finally get it made with you.
Be in Dublin.
Thanks, awesome, buddy. Mate. All right, mate. Thanks so much, Richie.
Go on. Good talking to you.
And you.
I'll talk to you soon.
We hope you enjoyed today's podcast. And if you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe.
If you want to learn more, head over to XTERRAplanet.com. There you can register for your next off-road race, learn more about this podcast, and find some amazing gear. If you have questions or comments, you can email us at podcast@XTERRAplanet.com.
And if you're interested in learning more about how to master your brain for endurance sports, we've written a book.
It's called The Brave Athlete and is available everywhere they sell books.
And we even have an audiobook. In fact, we narrate it.
Yes, that's not exactly a great selling point.